Imagine being in your 50s when you learn that your grandparents and great-grandparents lied to you about who you are. Imagine then that you find out that they made this choice because their options were to flee or live a lie. This is part of the story of my next guest. He grew up in the southern United States, and his fair complexion and southern accent would tell you that he is a Santa Rosa County local. But he later discovered being native was more than the zip code on his utility bill. It was 12 generations back of Muskogee Indian, hidden by his relatives for fear of being taken from their land or killed. Now he serves as chief of the Santa Rosa Creek tribe and is dedicated to learning, sharing, and preserving his native culture. Today, he's going to share his journey of rediscovery and how he's reconciling past and present and his personal campaign to dispel stereotypes. Thoughtful communicator, servant leader, fellow paradox, Dan Skyhorse. Thanks for coming.
Hische estongo.
Hische.
Chotako sutamiko. Jajifgados.
What did the second part mean?
I said, I am Chief Skyhorse. That is my name.
I love that. You often start your speeches and talks with the Muskogee language. Why is that important?
For just recently here in Pensacola at the bicentennial celebration, I was able to speak the Muskogee language openly and publicly in the city of Pensacola. And that has not been done in about 191 years. Because of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, it was illegal for us to speak our language in public or anywhere else. And that was in an effort to squash and to annihilate the entire culture.
So what did it feel like being on a microphone in downtown Pensacola speaking it at that moment?
As I was speaking it, I felt an empowerment from my ancestors. And when I stopped to think about what I had just done, then it was hard to start talking again. Mm. It was a very emotional moment for me and for many of our people.
I imagine. I watched that speech that you gave, and it was emotional for me, and I wasn't even there in person. That reclaiming of heritage, it's so personal, but so many people can relate to it. There's lots of young people right now who are on this journey of what they're calling decolonization, which it means something different for each person. Has that concept been a part of your journey?
Absolutely. The more I research, the more I find out that it was not just the white man came and took our land. It is so much more complex than that. It was an actual geopolitical struggle that included Spain, France, of course, Great Britain, and then later on the United States as it came to be. And it was much more complex than what the little bit of history that is actually taught and that over the years has been let out to the public. And you have to remember that the history is always written by the victors. So you can always tell if who won if there was a fight, because if the government forces won, it was a battle. If the Indians won, it was a massacre.
Whoa. Interesting. Oh, that brings up so many thoughts about the language, the words that we use, and how they affect our impression, our psychological impression of people groups. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about education in response to decolonization for your personal journey, is the reason that you brought up that because you've had to re-educate yourself, or is it another reason?
Oh, I didn't have to re-educate myself. I had to educate myself because there was so little of formal education in the school system that had been given. I recently read a passage from a school textbook for, I think it was fourth graders, from the state of Texas. And they described the Thanksgiving as that the pilgrims showed up and the Indians were so glad to see them that they gave them their land and moved away.
This is a current textbook?
Yes, within the past year.
How did you find that?
It was online. It was through one of the native sites that keeps up with such things.
Oh, that's a disaster.
And see, everybody can tell you the name of the ship that they came on, but I bet you can't tell me the name of the tribe that they came to see.
Nope, I can't. I have been on just a personal interest. It's just like sometimes certain topics just draw me in, and it's like a sprinkling over time. And my husband and I went to Fort Walton Beach and learned about the native culture there, which is so incredible and unique and specific. And then that kind of made me realize how little I knew. So I love what you're saying about it's not re-education, it's just education, period, because it was definitely missing from my life. And so I am interested in, especially your story, having grown up your whole life with this information hidden. How did you come across the information about your native heritage? How did that happen?
Well, there had always been stories and little tidbits of information that kind of slipped out over the years. And I did have the opportunity of knowing my great-grandmother, and later found out that she was a kind of a medicine woman that people went to be healed with herbs and such. And then my grandmother, whom I was very, very close to, in fact, she pretty much raised me while my mom worked as I was growing up. And so I would ask her if we were Indians, and she said, "Oh yeah, we're Black Cheek." Of course, there is no such thing as a Black Cheek. And then sometimes she would say, "Yeah, we're Black Irish." And that was a code word that the Indians used to hide their identities. They called themselves Black Irish because they were most of the time darker complected. And so they didn't want to be known as Indians because especially with the Indian Removal Act, Andrew Jackson of 1830 made it illegal to be an Indian east of the Mississippi River. And your choices were either die or go to Oklahoma. And everybody knows about the Trail of Tears. Well, what they don't know is during that period of time that the Indians were actually given a choice. And that choice was you can have your land or you can have your sovereignty, but you can't have both. So the ones that chose to have their sovereignty are the ones that went on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. The ones that chose to have the land are my ancestors who stayed in the area and hid in the river swamps and the woodlands when the government officials would come around to either take a census or try to find them. And all they wanted was just to be left alone on their land. And so my grandparents and my great-grandparents would not talk of us being of Indian descent because they were raised in the time when if you let someone know that you were Indian, the discrimination against you was horrendous. And then there was always the opportunity that you would be removed and sent to Oklahoma. And when the state of Florida went from being a territory to the state, one of the first things that they did was pass the same law that the Indian Removal Act had made, that it was be illegal to be an Indian in the state of Florida unless you did some special thing, some caveat that they would let you say if you behaved and if you belonged to a church. So the Methodists and the Southern Baptists were actually the saviors of the Indians. And by being able to be in the church, it gave the Indians the ability to kind of hold their community, their tribe intact and be in plain sight. But then if you wanted to travel from one county or one town to another town, you actually had to have written permission from the pastor of that church to be able to travel.
Oh my gosh. So it was assimilate or leave.
Correct.
Okay, so take me to the moment where you were thinking to yourself, take me to the moment where you went from whispers from grandma to I need to figure this out. Because so many white people are like, yeah, I'm a quarter whatever, native whatever. And it's just something they say. It's not really calling to them, but it clearly called to you. So help us understand what that looked like.
Well, the first thing that happened that waylaid my getting to know my heritage was I did a DNA test. And my DNA test came back that I had no Native American blood whatsoever in it. But I'll tell you a little something in a second about what was on that DNA test that I didn't know at the time. But the diversity of especially the Creek Indian people, the Creek Confederacy in the southeastern United States, was so diverse that there wasn't like a guy or a woman that everybody came from, because it was a melting pot long before the United States ever claimed to be a melting pot. And there were people who came from all over the world that came into this area. So it was a DNA test will tell you lineage and paternity and that sort of thing, but it will not tell you in ethnicity. So I stopped looking for my roots after I got that test for several years. And then I happened upon a guy that I had known all my life. He was a businessman in our town, and he happened to be a member of the Santa Rosa Creek tribe. And so I started talking to him, and he said, well, you've got some Indian in you. I said, no, I don't. Had a DNA test, don't have any. He said, I know who your family is. He said, you're an Indian. So we have a tribal genealogist. Her name is Gail Allred, and she was trained by the Daughters of American Revolution in doing genealogy. So she is top notch, just excellent. And so he said, well, let's get Miss Gail to just look at it and see what you got. Well, Miss Gail looked at it and came back to me, and I had Indians coming into my lineage from all over the place. I can trace it back 12 generations. Probably could go further back than that if we wanted to, but I figured 12 generations is a pretty good bet.
It's pretty solid.
Yeah. And I have 4 chiefs that are in my ancestry. And it was when I found out that, all my life I had been envious of people who their ancestors came from Italy, or they came from Ireland, or they came from, wherever, and they knew who they were. I didn't know who I was. I thought, basically, I'm a nobody, I'm a mutt. And then to find out that I descended from the Wind Clan, and the 12th great-grandmother was named Sahoy, and she was royalty in the Muskogee world. And so to know at that moment that I was transformed from nobody to a descendant of royalty, and it set a fire in my heart and in my soul. And my passion for being able to honor that ancestry in my people, it's taken over my life.
And what now that you have realized that, how did you continue to peel back the layers of culture lost?
Well, we've done that through other tribes, other native communities in the area, in Alabama and South Georgia and here in Northwest Florida. And we've gone to some of those folks and where there were elders who were told when they were growing up, they were told that they were Indian. They were told the information about the ceremonies and all of the cultural things. And so we've begun to go to those people, and if you ask, they will teach you. And so we are now doing native ceremony, the Muskogee ceremonies, each year. And it's the Muskogee people were monotheistic, so it wasn't a hard sell for the churches to come in, and we have Hesychademisi, which is the master of breath. The church had Jesus. We have Avafunga, who was the creator. Church had God. So it's like, yeah, just different names. But it wasn't exactly, wasn't an exact fit, but it was close enough that they were able to assimilate into the religious communities. But we're making great headways now and have learned tremendous amount about the ceremonial life of our people. And some of our ceremony things came up through the Mayans as the invasion into Mexico and South America, and they were displaced, and a lot of them moved up into this area. And our ceremonial grounds is actually an astrological calendar, and it tracks the movement of the sun because we were an agrarian type people, and it tracks the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the equinoxes. It tracks the movement of the planet Venus over a 5-year period of time. And there are certain measurements, precise measurements that the ceremonial square has, and there's an outer circle to the square, and it's called adagio. And that adagio is an exact ratio of the circumference of the Earth at the equator. How did they know?
That's some ancient alien stuff. That's intense. From your perspective, I'm imagining I'm in your shoes and you realize all this stuff about your heritage and your culture and the knowledge that they carried for so long that not only was kept secret from you on a personal familial level, but also from a broader educational level. It's not taught in schools. It's like you said, I remember something called a massacre, and growing up in Nebraska, I certainly learned about covered wagons, but we didn't ever dig into more of the anthropological side of culture and all of that. Did you have any change in your spiritual practices since discovering your heritage?
Oh, absolutely. Being able to be in ceremony and back to a very pure spiritual communication with Creator. In the ceremonies of our people, there's no doctrine, there's no dogma, there's no guidance of anything. It's when you're in the ceremony, it's you and it's the Creator, and there's just a direct line, and there's nothing to alter that or to influence it in any way, and it allows me, our people, to make that connection to the Creator, and it's a very intense spiritual connection that you gain through that.
I can imagine. What was it like when you reconnected with your ancestry, feeling all those feelings that you're sharing with us now, but having had 50 plus years of not experiencing any of the discrimination personally because you passed? Basically, I'm asking, what is it like to have white privilege but be a Native person?
Well, I just had a recent experience. We had a funeral for one of our people, and there were some ceremonial things that we do in preparation for the funeral, and one of them, of course, is the smudging and the purification by the smoke. And so we were out in the parking lot at the funeral home doing our smudging and cleansing and preparing for the funeral. And finished that, and I walked up onto the front of the funeral home, and somebody I had known all of my life. And I'm standing there, I have this hat on, I had some other Indian regalia clothing items on, and this guy starts making fun of what we were doing in the parking lot. And I'm like, dude, I'm here, I can hear you. And in that moment, it wasn't anything like what our people had experienced in the past, but it gave me that little glimmer to say, I get it. It's real. It's real.
Are there things that have been said in the past that you wouldn't have batted an eye at then that now are minimally cringeworthy?
Well, most of that is from Hollywood that I took along with everyone else because I didn't know any better. And Hollywood has done one of the biggest disservices to the native peoples of just about anything. And they portrayed the natives as being stuck in 200 years ago and having the hat. So I'm going to get out of 200 years ago and I'm going to come to today. And the Hollywood portrayed them as being the men being monosyllabic and the women being sexually available to white men. And most of the language that they used was the guttural things and ending every word with
Mm-hmm.
and but they had no shot at, like they do today, at having some of the indigenous languages included, because most of the actors at that time were Italian. So they had no shot at getting any kind of native language out of them whatsoever. And that stereotype has stuck with our people and kept us trapped in that 200 years ago or more error. Fortunately, Hollywood's doing a little bit better these days, but it's a lot too late.
Some people would look at the true history of natives, whether they're in the US or Canada or anywhere else, and they might be tempted to say, yeah, we get it, bad things happened, we should feel guilty as white people. What's your goal personally and for the community in educating ourselves on the real history? Is it to make people feel bad, or is it something higher?
Well, first of all, you can't out-victim an Indian. I don't care who you are, because of the history.
Yeah.
But we don't hold on to that, and I am not speaking for all Native Americans. I am not speaking for any specific segment, because that would be like you speaking for all people who are blonde, and it's too diverse. I do speak for myself, and I do represent our tribe. And what we are doing is we're trying to educate. We can't go back and change the past. There's nothing we can do about that. However, we would like them to stop doing what they've been doing. If I were to go into a government office and say, I am a Martian, and I would like my driver's license and my social security card, and I'd like to be registered on the census as being a Martian, no problem, they're fine. If I go into the same office and I say, I'm an Indian, I'm a Native American, then they say, whoa, wait a minute. Do you have papers? And this is a thing that was set in place. We call it a paper genocide. And this was set in place back in the Indian Removal Act times, where in order to be classified or recognized as an Indian by the U.S. government, you have to have documentation of who your ancestry was. Now, that's a European concept, and the only other two species that have to have that same documentation are horses and dogs and Indians. And we have, there are a lot of laws that have been enacted that keep the culture beat down, so to speak. The reservations have been a big destroyer of our people and the cultures, and they're designed to do that. There's a thing called blood quantum that was developed, and this is strictly the government's deal, and it said that after a number of times that you are the mother and father, or maybe one is Indian and one is not, then you've cut your blood quantum in half. Now that was a concept that was purely European and American government. That was not an Indian concept at all. And so the goal of this was that you keep diluting that blood quantum down to a point when then they say, well, you're not Indian enough anymore to be an Indian. But to my knowledge, they have not come up with anything that expunges the DNA that is Native American that goes back for thousands of years in myself and our people.
So learning the true history is about justice for future generations, that things like blood quantum don't have to be in existence, and that the government would acknowledge that that was an intentional process in order to, basically it was a trick. And that's not even addressing in the 60s and the 70s, how the U.S. government sterilized Native women without their consent. That's a whole nother thing. So it was intentional. And
yes.
So what you're saying is let's intention in another direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You said earlier your DNA revealed something surprising to you, and I don't want to finish our interview without you sharing what that surprise was.
I was 1.6% African.
Wow.
And that meant nothing to me at that time. But now that I have done research, the Emperor of Mali in Africa took 200 ships full of men, and he wanted to explore the rest of the world. And so they sailed on the New Guinea Current, and they came across the Atlantic Ocean, and they landed in about Brazil. And of those 200 ships that came over with all those people and supplies on them, only 2 ever went back to Africa. The rest of them stayed here and assimilated and into the native populations. And there's a Muskogee word that's used in the southeast United States that same word is used by the indigenous people of Peru, and it's pronounced the same and it has the same meaning.
Really? Wow. We are all so connected more than we think, aren't we?
Yes.
As we wrap up, tell everyone where they can learn more about your tribe and any closing thoughts that you want to share.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of my story. We are the Santa Rosa Creek Tribe, and it's santarosacreektribe.org or Facebook. We're out there. You can Google that and find us all over the place. But and we have a language program that we have developed, and we're just at the end of our first year of that language program because the number of native speakers has dwindled so much, and when the language dies, the culture dies, and that's one of our goals, is to keep that language and the culture alive. And so what I will say is there is no word for goodbye in the Muskogee language. So I will say, Hatam Chihi Chatlis. I will see you again.
I will see you again.
Mado.
Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. I hope to see you next week too. I talk with the most interesting people that you've probably never heard of. Most of them are paradoxical and bring an opportunity for you to grow as a person. So if you like bright, meaningful entertainment, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.